In the admin's article on the psychological aesthetics of NI, they describe an aesthetic that is restrained, delicate, and soothing. It includes elements of FE which would not appear in the psychological aesthetics of INTJs. A good way to think about the aesthetics of the INTJ is as a blend of the psychological aesthetics of NI and TE as described in the respective articles that the admins have written on the topic, and which can be found in the site's members area, but with a dollop of FI thrown in. What is beguiling in music to an INTJ is unlikely to be specifics of the orchestration, the tone, the pitch, or even particular melodies. Instead, he will respond to the ideas that the music triggered in him, and his attachment to the piece of music will be intertwined with his attachment to those ideas. For example, when Friedrich Nietzsche listened to the music of Richard Wagner, he did not appreciate it for its advances in chromaticism or tonal centers. He appreciated it because, in its grandeur and exuberance, its unfiltered romanticism and singular intensity, and in its radical break with musical orthodoxy, it reflected his own ideal of the creative, life-affirming individual who, through struggle and the assertion of the will, can escape the limitations of convention. In music, he heard his own exaltation. The downside of this cerebral approach is that it prevents the INTJ from experiencing the work of art on its own terms, independently of the intellectual superimpositions that are pulled down over the object. So after Wagner turned his back on what Nietzsche wanted him to be by embracing German nationalism, Nietzsche could no longer enjoy his music. Its technical merits, its pure aesthetic beauty were still the same as they had always been, but now that the intellectual connotations of what Wagner's music meant had changed, these objective aesthetic qualities no longer meant anything to Nietzsche, for now they no longer expressed Nietzsche's own ideas to him. They no longer reassured him that the things he expected of the world were yet to come. Nietzsche was unable to separate artist from art, and art from philosophy, so when he heard Wagner's music after their break, all it did was remind him of Wagner's perceived betrayal of his own philosophy. The same bombastic sound that Nietzsche had previously hailed as a glorious, life-affirming iconoclasm became a tasteless pastiche of what it once meant to him, a cruel mockery of his glorious ideal. And so, when Nietzsche broke his friendship with Wagner, he also disowned his friendship with Wagner's music, claiming that it lacked philosophical affect and represented nihilism. So what can we learn about INTJ aesthetics from the case of Nietzsche? That like INFJs, INTJs interpret works of art through subjective associations and ideas. But that, having FI instead of FE, the INTJ is more likely to appreciate romanticism and the romantic notion of the gifted lone individual, and to identify more personally with the art that he likes. Finally, having TE instead of TI, the INTJ is more likely to pass positive judgment on works of art that offer assertive, grandiose abstractions. INTJs are archetypically attracted to the theme of the proud and independent loner, rising above social and physical constraints. They do not examine the outer world directly, but rather look for truth in their own unconscious. They are concerned with discerning patterns and concepts applicable in general rather than specific circumstances. Unlike the ENTP and ENFP types, who tend to be extremely extensive in their perceptions, INTJs prefer to focus on a few highly valued insights. Thus, it can be said that INTJs strive for independent inspiration with no external barriers or complications standing between them and their vision. Plato's allegory of the cave, in which the philosopher escapes the shadowy simulacrum that others mistake for reality in order to be the one to, provides a classic example of the narrative of independent inspiration. But it is in the theology of Martin Luther that it finds its most influential proponent. Luther argued that an individual could experience divine inspiration independently and through his own knowledge of God and the Bible, with no need for an intermediate social institution or authorized clergyman acting on behalf of an organized church. Indeed, this narrative has a particularly strong pull on INTJs since, unlike INFJs, they have no auxiliary FE to push them to work harmoniously with others to achieve their goals. Instead, they seek independence and power. So, how does the narrative of the proud and independent loner manifest in the aesthetics of the INTJ? Their literature is one obvious avenue. INTJ writers such as Nietzsche and Ayn Rand often depict Lutheran heroes, even though they explicitly reject Christianity. Their heroes experience unique and superior insights which they access on their own terms, and which they are then compelled to assert against pre existing social arrangements and the fierce opposition of the unenlightened, even to the point of martyrdom. In painting, this same narrative is best evoked by Caspar David Friedrich's Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, an image that has often found its way onto the cover of Nietzsche's books. In the image, the wanderer's gaze into the murky fog below mirrors the NI type's examination of his unconscious, and the self reflective introspection characteristic of introverted intuition. His lofty perch atop the rocky precipice, from which he can gaze magisterially on everything beneath him, indicates the dominance yearned for by TE. His confident posture implies that he is indeed master of all he surveys. Yet he stands alone, implying paradoxically that he is also alienated from society, whether by choice or not. His kingdom is a private, personal one, and any insight he gains from it will be similarly detached. In this sense, he is at once ambitious yet alienated, and thus decidedly contrary. The contradiction here is between NI, which seeks seclusion, and TE, which seeks mastery. Aesthetically, this synthesis manifests as a romantic attitude towards ideas. The Romantic movement in art was primarily led by FI users, as FI lends itself more easily to great intensity of feeling and the artistic expression of deeply held values. In his art, therefore, the INTJ appreciates works which prompt not just mental reflection, but a passionate, willful mental reflection that can also at times carry a self righteous edge. But after an INTJ has secluded himself to pursue an idea and passionately attached himself morally and emotionally to that idea, what comes next? At this point, the INTJ must re engage with the world and use TE to actively assert it, like Luther nailing his theses to the church door, Zarathustra coming down from the mountain, or Lenin returning from Switzerland to lead the October Revolution. As a result, the INTJ aesthetic is likely to feature the same themes of struggle and self assertion, and that same conflict between anxiety and triumph that is also found in the TE aesthetic, but with the crucial difference that with INTJs it is ideas that are being asserted, rather than, as is sometimes the case with ETJs, simply wanting efficiency for the sake of efficiency or winning for the sake of winning. As such, it is not actually Wagner who is the best representative of the INTJ aesthetic in music. Wagner's works are assertive, yes, but they do not assert anything in particular. Siegfried is not motivated to assert his values or ideas. He is motivated simply to assert, until he encounters something that makes him feel fear. Rather, the INTJ aesthetic in music can be seen most clearly in Beethoven. Beethoven's Ode to Joy is based on a poem which envisioned an end to monarchy and a Kantian ideal of humanity as an end in itself. In Beethoven's setting, various melodies rise intermittently, only to be crushed by mournful cellos and basses, mirroring the struggle to assert the idea that the poem represents. When the main theme is introduced, it begins quietly, almost unconsciously, and gradually gains in intensity until the cellos and basses are forced into accompaniment. The theme is eventually given voice in the triumphal choral variations. The melody itself is simple yet powerful, like the idea behind it.